Welcome to What's Up With That, a podcast offering conversations from diverse perspectives on spirituality, personal growth, and success. Your host is Don Brewington. That's me. Join me and my guest this evening, the Reverend Dr. Melanie Jones Quarles, professor and author. Her most recent publication is Up Against a Crooked Gospel. That's an awesome title, and it makes you want to think about it, right? Up Against a Crooked Gospel. Our primary focus this evening, while the book sounds wonderful, our primary conversation this evening is looking at womanist theology from the perspective of liberation theology and the many lenses that we can view the gospel. And so we want to engage that conversation with what is womanist theology? Is it necessary? Is it in keeping with what it means to be scripture? What it means to relate to the gospel in significant ways so that people might understand the gospel and their lives, is the way I'm going to put it, and their lives might be changed. Reverend Dr. Melanie Jones Quarles, welcome to What's Up With That, and glad to have you here.
Same. It's good to be in the virtual landscape, and excited about this new podcast that you have, and excited to be here in conversation with you tonight.
Thank you. I do appreciate it. It's been a while, right? I guess it's been a little over a year now that I've seen you. Okay. We're going to give you a chance to talk about your book in a few minutes too, because we got a glimpse of it at my old job. We got a glimpse of it as you were preparing it and putting it out. But we'll say more about that in a bit. Well, actually, you just told us a little bit about yourself. Why don't we go ahead and just move to the book? That sounds great. Up Against a Crooked Gospel. One, can I just, where is it that you at Union Presbyterian Seminary? Is that right?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying I teach theology and ethics at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. And I have the distinct pleasure of directing the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership at Union.
There's that word.
Yes, a womanist.
Yeah.
Which is committed to nurturing the soul work of Black women as we cultivate pathways to whole communities. What's distinctive about Dr. Cannon, who the center is named in her honor, is that she was the first Black woman ordained in the Presbyterian Church roughly 51 years ago in 1974. And she taught significantly at Union Presbyterian Seminary for about 17 years from 2001 to 2018. Her work and legacy is significant as well because she is a womanist trailblazer, first generation womanist voice and an ethicist, and was central to building what we now know to be womanist theology and womanism in religious studies.
Okay, awesome. So how long have you been there? It's been a while now, right? I think you've been to HT twice. There were some time in between that, so you've been there for a little time now. Is that right?
Yeah, I got to Union in the fall of 2019. Yeah, I've been there for a few years now.
Okay, they're gonna be naming a center after you in a minute. Fantastic. You also are married, I think, just over a year, so almost still a newlywed. Is that right?
Yes, we're still newlyweds. Married in fall of 2023, so almost a year and a half, and we're loving each other, and so excited about our partnership in Union.
Awesome. Well, I am just so happy to have you here today. And I'm one of those persons that I'm not a big fan of virtual land, but you are just so phenomenal that I had to get you on here any way I could. So I'm grateful even to do this in virtual land. I want to take a few minutes just before we dive into what it means to be a womanist theologian. And I don't know, up against the cricket gospel, um, you might be doing some sharing as you talk about up against the cricket gospel, right? From a womanist writer. Uh, Tell us about this book. It certainly sounds interesting. Um, I understand that I've not since retired from HT, but you are Ernest T. Dixon lecturer, and we have an annual lecture on the HT campus, and so we invite a theologian in so that we can help. Well, I keep saying so we can help. I'm not there anymore, right? I'm tired. So that during that time, the goal was to help students to understand that yes, we come to the Bible from a biblical perspective, from that spiritual perspective, but we also ought to engage that book that we call Bible in an intellectual way as well. And so we invite our scholars, our professors to come in and engage our students. And during that time, the last time you were with HT, you gave us a glimpse of the book uh, through the eyes of the women of the color purple. This title, you've got to be selling them out. They've got to be constantly be stocking the shelves just because of the title. Talk about this book with us for a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Up Against the Cricket Gospel is one of my babies that has been released into the world, Black Women's Bodies and the Politics of Redemption. It is published by Orbis Press. It comes from my dissertation, which also has the same title, but it is the revised dissertation. So it's a little bit of an expansion. And part of what I'm getting at is ways that Black women's virtues have often been shifted into vices, and their vices have not, their virtues have not been understood as virtues and have been morally kind of shifted into this kind of sense that they are not valued, their bodies are not respected, they are often not seen as contributors or valuable to various institutions. And so it parallels or takes up this conversation in relation to the church and society. Part of what I'm after is a recognition that we are in a hostile cricket world that often undermines and misrecognizes Black women's virtue and character. And part of undoing that world is by confronting this very reality. I utilize the story of my grandmother in particular to unpack her narrative as a Black woman who was raised in the South, who originally was a domestic in the South, and who moved to the North and became a hotel service worker for the Hyatt Hotels, which has been historically one of the hotel industries or brands that have had significant troubles in terms of its labor realities for service workers. And so that journey of her particularly laboring as a domestic and then later working in hotels ultimately contributed to the bending of her back. In the last quarter of her years, she spent her life bent over. And so I parallel that narrative of my grandmother utilizing womanist storytelling in order to engage in terms of biblical text, the story particularly of the Luke 13 narrative of the bent over woman, and to put these conversations, these stories together and articulate ways in which this bendedness that the woman experiences in the text mirrors some ways in which Black women's virtues, right, have been twisted, and their character has often been marked as vicious, that they've encountered a crooked world that has twisted them often upside down. And the results of this bendedness, what are some possibilities for liberation and transformation that Jesus provides, much like the narrative, requires that we speak back to those systems, that structures that ultimately have caused them to bend. And that's exactly what the text opens up for us, and exactly what it does.
Okay, so it's looking at the devaluing of our women in a vast array of ways that that's done, and going to the gospel to treat that story and to find the woman's place in that place based on who they are and where they come from. Is that? And so specifically, and I'm going to be, shall I say, I'm sure that this read is a phenomenal read for anyone. But my sense is that it speaks, specifically to Black women. Would that be?
Absolutely. Black women are at the center of the text, but this is a text that is important for not only Black women, it's important for the Black church, it's important for Black religious leaders, it's important for all folks who are seeking for justice and liberation for those who are marginalized and oppressed. And this particular narrative of Black women's experiences gives us an example of that in contemporary and in close view.
Okay. Okay. Sounds interesting. I'm going to purchase my copy uh, and take a read. I know we talked a couple of days ago, and I said, "Oh, I'm not going to get it in time." Wished I had been able to have the read, but that's a good reason to see if I can twist your arm to get you back. And after I read the book myself, then we can get you back on, and we can have a great conversation about the book and all that's in there, as we look at it through the lens of the gospel as well. So that would be awesome. I think perhaps it's a segue for our conversation this evening. Um, I had last week uh, the Reverend Dr. Henry, Singleton on. He's in North Carolina. He had three books. Actually, I bought all three of them. A liberation theologian. I'm going to say in this 21st century, right? A young brother who is doing some phenomenal work. Wanted to expose our listeners, our audience, to liberation theology. What is that about? The different ways, because so often it's so many look at the gospel through a single lens, and if you look outside that lens, many would say maybe you're a heretic, maybe you are exploiting the gospel, you are not reading the gospel authentically. And so it was a wonderful conversation about liberation theology, and more specifically, Black liberation theology. One lens that we view the gospel and that we understand how we interpret the gospel as well, from a marginalized perspective. My sense is that all too often, well, my sense is that we as a people, unless you are in that sphere, are not aware of womanist theology, what that means, and what that means to view the gospel from a womanist lens. So wanted to just as we come to this topic, what is a womanist theologian? You've mentioned it for women, for those who are marginalized. What is a womanist theologian?
Yeah, I think before we can get to that question, a central question is, what is womanist? What is womanism? Where does that kind of terminology come from? And womanist as a term draws from Black Southern colloquial expression from the terms or phrase that folks may be familiar with, such as you acting womanish or you acting mannish, often speaking to this exchange between Black women, a mother often to her child, about a woman acting, a girl, child acting a little bit grown up for her age, or serious, often acting audacious, and all of that. So that's where that term originally came from in terms of colloquial Southern expressions. Alice Walker, who is a Pulitzer Prize winner, author of The Color Purple, put a framing or definition to that term in 1983 in her seminal work In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, A Womanist Prose. And she utilized womanist in that particular collection of essays, and her editor prompted her to define what does that term mean. From that, we have a four-part definition, or at least a four-part framing that speaks first to the kind of audaciousness of womanism. The second speaking to what Stacey Floyd Thomas, the first part speaking to what Stacey Floyd Thomas, a womanist ethicist, names as radical subjectivity. The second part speaking to a womanist loving the entire people, the wholeness of the entire African-American people, speaking to this, what is named or often deemed in terms of a theoethical tenet as traditional communalism. That third part of the definition says a womanist loves love and food and roundness, loves the spirit, loves herself regardless. Which speaks to this category or tenet of redemptive self-love. And then the final piece of that definition is womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender, indicating a kind of deeper engagement that is critical. A critical engagement that is necessary when we look at the kind of darkening or the deep experiences that are connected to Black women in relation to even their feminist counterpart.
Okay, when you talk about the feminist counterpart, who are we speaking about specifically?
White women.
Okay.
As white feminists, as one way of thinking of that. For sure, they are Black feminists. And there are multiple different kinds of feminists. There are different ways by which people approach feminism. But in particular, I think Walker is speaking to, in that fourth part, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender, to white feminists in particular.
Okay. And you've shared something because I guess as I learned the terms and viewed the terms, I completely separated the two out. So typically when I speak feminist theology or womanist theology, I make a clear distinction that feminist is white, womanist is women of color, and more specifically Black women. What I'm hearing you say is that that's not necessarily true.
No, that's not what you hear me say. I
Okay.
said in that definition, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender, saying that we might, in relation to white women, have experiences that are similar in terms of patriarchy, but there is a deeper lens when we engage these systems of oppression that are multidimensional, that speaks to Black women's experience to not only be a case of sexism, but also to be layered by issues of race, class, and other kinds of oppressions that are at work. So there's a way by which we might see ourselves as counterparts or kind of colleagues or comrades in these journeys, but it is not to say that they are the same or that their issues that feminist theologians and womanist theologians often are exactly the same thing. That's not the case.
Okay. So, and I believe, so why the distinction? And I understand the marginalization piece. And when I thought of the liberation piece, I felt that the womanist theology had to be a part of this series as well. But and as we look at it, you mentioned patriarchy. The terms that you feminist, white, womanist, black women of color, and I don't know when I say women of color, I might be too general. Maybe it is black women. But the need for a womanist theology. Why? As we look at the gospel.
Yeah, so I think there are two ways of thinking about this. I think first, womanist theologians who womanism is a discourse and discipline that spans a number of different disciplines. I think it has had most traction within religious studies. So womanist theologians quickly adapted. These are names like Dolores Williams and Jacqueline Grant and Katie Geneva Cannon, as I said earlier, who adapted Alice Walker's definition, and the term womanist found some resonance with it against ways in which feminism had been framed for a particular group of women, and found their voice to be outside of that construct and needed and found resonance again with womanism as a term to claim, as also intellectual kinds of space of naming, critical naming, that they could find space and place of their own. So in response to feminists in particular, womanists in the early 1980s, as I say, in 1983, Walker wrote that text. Just as early as 1985, Katie Cannon is sourcing Alice Walker's term womanist in her first published article, The Emergence of a Black Feminist Consciousness, and she introduces a Black womanist consciousness to get at the reality of Black women's experiences as often, particularly in the US context, as the most oppressed of the oppressed, as she names. And so they were and womanists continue to do, is to critique the ways in which feminists in their fight against sexism and patriarchy, that is the social ordering of society that often privileges maleness and privileges men, have often not been concerned with other multidimensional issues of oppression like race and class that often injure the experiences of women who are non-white. This includes or centers Black women in particular in terms of womanism, but could include women of color across spectrums that have also experienced this kind of marginalized oppression. And it was also a critique, even as it is connected to or linked to Black liberation theology, because it's a recognition that Black liberationists, particularly male Black liberationists, Jacqueline Grant, as early as 1979, in her work, responding to looming large figures like the father of Black liberation theology, James Cone, whose early works did not even include women and children, as a critique that if these visions by Black male liberationists provide us with a vision of liberation and have women do not include the experiences of women or children, then this is according to Grant, no authentic vision of Black liberation. So in that sense, womanist theology is necessary and has been an important conversation partner and mode or perspective or approach in terms of critical engagement and in terms of theological reformation as well as transformation in terms of the call to justice, because it has tried to look at not only these multidimensional experiences of oppression, but also ways in which we might think of anti-oppressionist systems as we consider the survival and liberation of Black women, but ultimately a more just society for all of us.
Okay. So you mentioned patriarchy. Patriarchy is that male dominance piece for many. Um, could you say a little bit more in terms of, and you've crossed over, and that sense of biblical narratives are told from a patriarchal perspective, um, leaving out the voice of the woman. Uh, can you say more in terms of why that lens is important and maybe because of that?
Why the lens of patriarchy is important?
Why the lens of womanist theology is important as a result of patriarchy?
Yeah, so it's a recognition that the biblical text, in the way in which, and I am no biblical scholar, but certainly do biblical interpretation, and because I think it's a source of authority for most Black Christians, as well as it is important for us to utilize as a source in terms of thinking about how do we live a moral and ethical life, right? How do we think about how the Bible resources us on our journey towards a just Christian life? And so, in that sense, I think it's a deep recognition that the Bible has often provided us with narratives that often miss the perspectives and the stories of women and other oppressed or marginalized groups. That these stories, they're often people's names who are missing, their voices that are missing, that does not privilege the characters, often do not privilege these voices of the marginalized. And we have to do the critical and constructive work, right, to find these stories. One perfect example is all throughout the Hebrew Bible or the First Testament or the Old Testament. There's this mention as early as Genesis, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? How might we understand the God of Sarah, the God of Hagar, right? The God of Dinah, the God of Tamar, right? Where are these voices and perspectives that are not easily taken up in our communities, and also help us to think more fruitfully and expansively about who God is? Dolores Williams, a womanist theologian, has written exclusively about Hagar in particular, and the ways in which Hagar's story parallels the experiences of many Black women that has historically throughout time. She's a young teenage girl who is of African descent and origin, who is coerced and forced to ultimately live as a slave with slaveholders of Sarai and Abram, who are determining what to do with her body and ultimately offer her up in use of their needs in order to create new offspring. These are markers and challenges that many enslaved women face. In Genesis 21, she's also a character, Hagar in particular, that is kicked out of that home and left in the wilderness to think about how to survive as a single mother with a child, Ishmael, to take care of. These experiences mirror some of the experiences that Black women have encountered as well. So this narrative, who is God, right? Hagar says, and she is one of the one who names God, God as Elroy, a God who sees. How does that vision of God, or the vision that Hagar gives us of God, help us to understand who God is and our relationship to God, especially in the midst of survival, when liberation is not a quick or an easy end? How do we navigate the realities of wilderness when there is more struggle than there is triumph, right? These are why we need to reclaim, to think deeply about these characters and pull these stories up from the margins, because they are often undervalued and underrepresented.
Okay. If I were maybe a hard fundamentalist, perhaps I would say something like they have value, and while we need to give attention to them, they do nothing to leading us towards our salvation. How would you respond? Is the gospel a gospel just about salvation, or is there more to it than that?
I think that's a large question, right? When we talk about the gospel, and there are many ways in which folks might think about the gospel, but I think the gospel reveals to us the birth, life, the ministry, the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It also calls us to what Jesus did, and that is a recognition and a deep concern for those who are oppressed and for those who are on the margins. I lean into Jesus's embracing, right, of this prophetic tradition in Luke 4:18, when he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me and anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to set the captives free," right, to liberate the oppressed, to recovery of sight to the blind, to, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. All of these acts provide a radical social vision of liberation that requires a social orientation, a reorientation, often that disorients us from the conditions that suggest we ought to be comfortable, and to let the status quo or the realities that we face to just be. Jesus calls us to a new vision, I think a greater vision, that there is deep concern for the margins. There is deep concern for those who are without, right? He takes upon, not only acts in the work he does, but in the people that he hangs with, right? And the communities that he embraces are often those people, those contexts that were unassuming, that were not supposed to be considered, that shouldn't have been redeemed, that shouldn't have been saved, right? That shouldn't have had healing or received certain encounters with the divine. And they become the most least likely people, ultimately become the mouthpieces. They become the ones who tell the goodness, who tell the story, and they provide us with a gospel that is preached around the world. So, I mean, this is the gospel. This question of dealing and engaging with folks on the margins and hearing the voices and perspectives of these folks who are often missing. That is exactly what Jesus did and what Jesus calls us. And that is the gospel that we must ultimately embrace.
Okay. Part of me wants to say, who tells the story? And if you want to come back to, you said an ethicist, and as we talk about being a womanist and an ethicist, want to sort of look at that in terms of that you are and do. But for a moment, who tells the story, and is it okay? We understand that the plight of women preachers has been rough. It's been a journey. In many traditions, it's a whole lot better. In some traditions, it's still a struggle, right? So for those, and I do know a few women that I'd say preachers, right? But I'm not a preacher because, right? They've been taught that that's not what women do, right? Um, not only is it okay, but if indeed God has called you, are we to move beyond our quote unquote tradition or societal norms so that you can be true, understanding that God will even use women and has used them in profound ways. And maybe if we really look in the gospel and look at some of the women in the gospel, that they were actually used to tell a story. And we've just not had big enough eyes to really see it.
Part of what my book engages is a very simple truth. There is no gospel of Jesus Christ without women. To that point, you're exactly right. That all throughout the gospel stories, what we encounter is women who ultimately followed Jesus, who were healed and touched, who were delivered by Jesus, who are there with Jesus in his most critical moments. I'm talking about on the cross, near the cross, standing at the foot of the cross, who are participating in his burying and who are first to see him as resurrected and are also the first to tell the good news of his resurrection. That is the gospel story, and the women are the first to do it. Which tells us that there is no question in my mind about whether or not God called women, because it is evident exactly in every gospel story. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are clear on one thing: the women tell the good news of Jesus's resurrection. And because of that, I think it requires and it calls all of our communities to think more expansively about our visions of truth tellers, of wisdom bearers, right? Of these proclaimers, that they too are women. That embody these stories. That's not just for biblical times, but this is for contemporary moments. I recognize as a Black Baptist clergywoman that I also belong to a tradition, and particularly Black Baptist church, that has lagged behind in the fully embracing women as religious leaders, as clergy persons, right? And with that, it is significant to name that I'm ordained Baptist, that I have a kind of Baptist lineage, but that this call is something that is significant and that ultimately is related to not only my convictions in terms of my Christian convictions, but also something that's necessary for folks who are coming up the road to see that it's possible for folks to come through traditions that often not made it possible for women to be ordained, and find folks who are ordained in those traditions and find a pattern for them to follow and ultimately to claim their own sense or to claim their own call.
Okay. And how do you see that road right now, that path? Because it's been a journey, right? I did seminary over 30 years ago. um, so uh, there were challenges then, greater challenges probably, but there were challenges then, still challenges now. Um, what would you say to the men who see the gospel from that male lens, who may be not necessarily intentionally minimize the role of women, because maybe that's some of what has happened. Those roles have been minimized for whatever reason. Um, what would you say to move the needle even more?
Quite frankly, there is no place for gender exclusion in the kingdom of God.
All right.
There's no place.
I'm smiling, I'm laughing, but it's a strong statement. It's a powerful statement that there's no place for gender exclusion. Is that part of that God will use whomsoever he will? Some would say that God will use whomever she will. Um, Understanding God is spirit. Spirit has no gender. How does that fit in? And um, there's a call to hear, and maybe I cut you off. I didn't mean to cut you off, but there is no gender exclusion. It's a powerful statement. It's a powerful statement. So, and I think you're going to add to that. Didn't mean to cut you, but there is no gender exclusion You finish that out as you
It's
tell.
finished. It's no
Is that
place
it?
for it.
That's it.
It's no place for it. I mean, I just narrated for you that all throughout the Gospels, that it is the women who are used as these least likely candidates to ultimately proclaim the good news of Jesus's presence and continued witness in the world. It's no place for it. There's no place for limiting women's participation and proclamation, public proclamation, as they tell the good story, the good news of Jesus Christ. If it's biblical, why are we even having the question about its existence in a contemporary time? It's no place for it, because God's vision through Jesus is inclusive, is intended to have place for all of us.
Okay. Can I just go way back for a moment?
Sure.
That sounds real good, but you came from your husband's rib. Uh, he leads, male head of all things, right? Uh, are you not supposed to know your place? Don't cuss me, okay? Don't say real bad, but just hypothetical, maybe. And maybe it's still real out there, right? That there's something to it.
Yeah, I don't doubt that those perspectives exist, and they may be perspectives that people still claim.
Okay.
But theologically, I think they're actually antithetical. They're against actually what the gospel. Those are crooked perspectives, crooked
Okay.
manifestations
Okay.
of ways that ultimately could bring us to a just ordering of society, a just ordering of our churches, a just ordering of our communities. That's exactly what I think Black women in particular are up against.
Okay.
But Jesus provides for us another path, another way to accept, to value our voices, our bodies, our lives, our leadership, our perspective. And I think that is gospel, that is biblical, that speaks against those traditions that try to say otherwise.
Okay. So ours is not to limit God, and we need to stop trying to limit God. He's bigger than that. Thank you. I think there's a lot more that can be said there, but certainly that lens becomes not only an important lens, it becomes a necessary lens as we open up and look at the gospel. Um, the intention of God through Christ for His people, for this world. Um, you are a womanist ethicist. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I am an ethicist, so I'm a womanist, one who utilize approaches of kind of womanist thought in terms of privileging the survival and liberation of Black women at the center, but is anti-pressionist in my efforts in thinking about how this impacts all persons as it relates to questions or issues of justice. As an ethicist, I'm concerned with the moral life and particularly why people do what they do. What are the intentions, actions that ultimately motivate their practices? I often think about this alongside the being, thinking, doing continuum. That is, ethicists begin to ask questions often when who we say we are does not align with what we say we believe and ultimately what we practice, which forces us to ask new questions to ourselves. Is it who we are that needs to be redeveloped, or we need to think differently about that? Is it what we say we believe that we need to reform or rethink, or is it what we practice? Is there new behaviors or change, transform behavior that we need to live into?
Yeah. So then, as we look at the various lenses, liberation theology, womanist theology, um, but, um, that means there's a not that, does that mean that it's a call to look at, and from that ethical perspective, how we live that life? Um, let's see if I can capsule and make it real easy. Um, then does it become important for us to understand that our salvation is important, and we need to know where we're going in life beyond here? Uh, how important is it, as we look at that, to understand what it means for us to live out that life here, and an understanding as we live it out that it's not a single lens that we view it?
I think what you're asking is, what's the relationship between what we do here on Earth, connected to what happens in the afterlife? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. I mean, we had to be concerned. We want to be concerned about where we're going, but what about now? And is Yes, that's what I'm asking. So I'll let you answer that, and then maybe if I can add on. Yes.
Well, I mean, I think womanist and liberation theologies are this worldly. And what I mean by that is have a kind of real concern that there is no waiting for a kind of sweet by and by that comes in the end, that all things will be kind of taken care of in the end. No, we work towards that liberation. We work towards that transformation in the very present. So that means that there is not waiting from some cosmic redemption that will come later on, but that our work of justice, our work of love, right? Our work of um, um, uh, deep and deep kind of prophetic social change that must happen now. That must be work that we contribute to in the here and now, to respond to the social conditions that exist in our world right now, right? And so I think that that liberation theologies in particular are deeply concerned with life first, as a kind of primary order, and theology second.
Okay. Is that scriptural?
It absolutely is. Right? Jesus was concerned about the people that he was encountering in the present, even as he knew, or perhaps may have been aware that there was something, a job that would have to be done at a time that would come. He didn't say, because I'm going to the cross, I won't stop here by and heal the son of the widow at Nain. Most of his work was on travel, on the way to Jairus's daughter. He heals the woman with the issue of blood, right? Or the hemorrhaging woman, right? On the way to the next thing, he found some recognition for that which he encountered and did the work that was necessary in that moment, in order to handle that which was before him.
Okay. This is woman's theology, because I want to ask another question. I'm not sure it's in keeping with. So I'm going to leave that one. It's been a good conversation. We'll have to continue it. I understand that you have other commitments, and I promised you 1 hour. That's hard to do, and the time passes quickly. And if I'm not careful, I'll keep talking, and it'll be 1.5 going on. And I said, "Oh, golly, I didn't know that. Let's wrap up." So wonderful conversation. Um, I'm praying that there are those who are listening. One would understand what it means to be a womanist theologian. Two, to understand that there is more than a single way of looking at the gospel, and we must honor the many lenses that come to the text, right? So I thank you for your sharing. I thank you for your time, and my prayer is that something has been said that has opened up the mind. And I especially appreciate um, the work we have to do now. The hereafter is wonderful. It's a place we all look to go, but we live here and now. And what do we do to make this world a better place for all? And I think when we can appreciate the lenses of liberation theology, of womanist theology, of feminist theologians, and even some of the patriarchal views, that we can come with the full scope, and hopefully, rather than being judgmental, we can open our hearts, our minds, our eyes, and see the value in all. Yeah. So I appreciate you. I want to push your book up against a Cricket Gospel, and we can see it's available via Amazon. It's at Barnes and Noble. So get the book. I'm going to get the book, and I'm going to hope that when I read, I might see if I can get a couple of folks to read, and we can come back and have a really good discussion. Your friend Dominic Robertson, Dr. Dominique Robertson. I thought about trying to see if I can grab her. I said, well, she's been busy, let me leave her alone. But we'd love to get her back to the table with you to have a conversation. So I'm going to get it. I'm going to see if I can get a folks to say, hey, have you read it? If not, why don't you read it and come on back and let's have a conversation around up against a crooked gospel. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your spirit. I am no longer HT, but I'm going to have to, I don't know. I'm trying to find a way to stay away from that. But send an email, a text message, or something to the new chaplain and say, hey, this is a lady and you need to get her back, okay? Soon. So you were all, I think the two times that you were there, you were indeed a blessing. You were indeed a blessing. So thank you for the many ways in which you touch.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This was a wonderful conversation. Look forward to future engagement.
Awesome. And we want to thank those of you who took the time out to be with us, to share this in this podcast experience on this evening. My prayer is that something has been said that will allow you to broaden your perspective, to understand the many ways in which God speaks authentically, and his word is true. He's speaking in such a way through the many lenses that allows lives to be transformed, and that his love might truly be manifested in this earthly realm. So glad that you were with us. Pray that you will join us next week as we explore those things spiritual, religious, and ask the question, what's up with that? Until then, blessings.